Trust in medieval communities was rare, not because people were inherently suspicious, but because survival demanded caution. Resources were scarce, life was precarious, and danger was constant. Every interaction carried risk. Giving confidence to another person meant exposing oneself to potential harm, whether through theft, betrayal, or failure. In this context, trust was not assumed. It was calculated, measured, and carefully limited. From early life, people learned that appearances could be deceptive. Neighbors, peers, and even family members could act in self-interest. Alliances were conditional. Cooperation existed, but it was fragile, dependent on immediate benefit and mutual necessity. Bonds formed out of shared labor or proximity, not shared values or sentiment. Trust became a commodity, exchanged sparingly, and withdrawn quickly when it was challenged. The structure of society reinforced this scarcity of confidence. Hierarchies, authority, and labor obligations created constant pressure. People were accountable not only to themselves, but to landlords, masters, and social norms. Failure to meet expectations could result in punishment, loss of resources, or social marginalization. Under these conditions, reliance on others was inherently risky. The individual learned to prioritize self-preservation, while cooperation was tactical rather than instinctive. Psychologically, limited trust shaped thought and perception. Every action, word, and gesture was evaluated for potential consequences. Observation became essential. Reading intentions, anticipating behavior, and predicting reactions were part of daily cognition. People learned to measure generosity, loyalty, and reliability before investing any confidence. Trust was always provisional, contingent, and fragile. Even within families, trust was tempered by pragmatism. Resources, labor, and attention were limited. Dependency carried consequences, and older children or weaker members could be marginalized. Emotional bonds existed, but they were filtered through the lens of survival. Attachment required calculation. Vulnerability was risky, and revealing needs could lead to disadvantage rather than support. Over time, this scarcity became self-reinforcing. Communities habituated to mistrust produced behaviors that maintained it. Rumors, caution, and measured communication dominated interaction. Social cohesion was practical, enforced by necessity rather than mutual confidence. Trust existed in small pockets, always conditional, always tied to immediate survival. As the limits of trust became ingrained, they shaped both individual behavior and community dynamics. People learned to rely on observation rather than assurance, to anticipate deception, and to weigh risk in every interaction. Relationships were maintained cautiously, with loyalty conditional on continued benefit and reliability. Even long-standing bonds were tested constantly because circumstances changed abruptly and resources remained scarce. This cautious approach influenced social cooperation. Work, protection, and alliances were transactional rather than sentimental. Assistance was extended selectively, often contingent on immediate return or necessity. Public actions were scrutinized, and private intentions were concealed. Knowledge of others' behavior became a form of survival skill. Those who misjudged trust or overextended confidence faced not only personal loss, but potential exclusion from vital networks. Psychologically, the constant evaluation of others produced vigilance and restraint. People internalized the logic of mistrust, regulating speech, gestures, and exposure. Trust required evidence, repetition, and reliability. Emotional openness was limited, and vulnerability was often suppressed. Survival depended on managing perception as carefully as resources, anticipating both threats and opportunities in every interaction. Communities adapted to these constraints by embedding mistrust into culture. Norms emphasized caution, discretion, and prudence. Rumors, reputation, and social observation became mechanisms to enforce behavior. Trust existed in controlled forms, among those who demonstrated consistent reliability, within families who survived together, or between allies whose mutual dependence was undeniable. Even then, it remained fragile, contingent, and provisional. This pervasive scarcity of trust shaped moral and social reasoning. Actions were judged less by principle and more by practical outcome. Reciprocity, obligation, and duty were constantly weighed against self-preservation. The social fabric depended on a careful balance: cooperation enough to survive, restraint enough to avoid exploitation. Trust was rare because it carried risk, and survival required minimizing exposure to harm. Over generations, these patterns created a society deeply cautious, highly observant, and psychologically attuned to risk. People learned to live in tension between need and suspicion. Bonds were maintained not through blind confidence, but through repeated evidence of reliability. Trust became a skill, cultivated slowly, measured constantly, and granted sparingly. Ultimately, the rarity of trust defined medieval life. It dictated how people collaborated, how they judged others, and how they protected themselves. Communities functioned, but always with caution embedded in every interaction. Life demanded vigilance, calculation, and awareness that confidence, once extended, could be withdrawn or betrayed at any moment. Trust was not absent, but it was conditional, fragile, and inseparable from the logic of survival.